Good morning, and thank you for tuning into our channel once again. My name is Dennis Morse, and I'm the minister for the Church of Christ in Jefferson, Texas. We're in the Gospel of John, John chapter 10, and Jesus, of course, has spoken unto the Jewish people some parables. And as a result of that, we find that there are some divisions that took place in connection with what Jesus said. Notice what it says there in John chapter 10 and verse 19. There was a division, therefore, again among the Jews for these sayings. And so notice once again that as Jesus is preaching, as Jesus is teaching, you find that some Jews are saying one thing and other Jews are saying another. Some are saying that Jesus is blaspheming, that he is of the devil or he has a devil. And then you have those who are saying, well, wait a minute now, how in the world can a man who's doing the things that he's doing have a devil? Is this not the Christ? And so you have a division among the Jews because of what Jesus was teaching and what Jesus was doing. For example, notice in verse 20 that it says what? And many of them said, he hath the devil, he is mad. Why hear ye him? Others said, these are not the words of him that hath the devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind? Now, what are they talking about? Well, remember previously, Jesus had healed the blind man, and it was on the Sabbath, and some of the Jews found fault with that. And yet we find that here are these people who are saying, how in the world can he have a devil saying the things he's saying and doing the things he's doing? I mean, think about it. He healed a blind man. How can somebody have a devil who is able to do something like that? And so there are those Jews who are coming around now, believing in Jesus because of what he said and because also of what he did, and that's talking about the miracles that he performed. In verse 22, and it was at Jerusalem, the feast of dedication, and it was winter. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, how long do you make us doubt? If you be the Christ, tell us plainly. And Jesus said, I told you, and you believe not. The works which I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. And remember now that based on what Jesus has been teaching and also by what he's been doing, healing individuals, that the Jews are starting to come around. But now it sounds to me like this is that group who's trying to say, okay, you just go ahead and tell us. And Jesus said, I have told you. And not only have I told you, but think about the things that I've been doing. The works that I am doing, they bear witness of me. In other words, they're proof of the fact that I am the Son of God. Well, in verse 26, he said what? But ye believe not, because ye are not of my sheep. And that's what Jesus had talked about in the first portion of our study there in John chapter 10. He said, you're not of my sheep. He says, I know them and they follow me, and I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father, which give me them, or give them me, which give them me, is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. Now, I want you to notice what he says here in verse 30, because once again, we find that Jesus is doing what? He is telling them he's the Son of God. And so, he tells them, and yet what is their attitude? What do they want to do now when Jesus said, I am the Messiah, I am the Son of God, I am the one who's God sent? Whether they say, well, thank you for telling us that, and now we're going to follow you. No, because in verse 31, it says, then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Well, they didn't want to hear that. And of course, Jesus asked them there in verse 32, many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of these good works do you stone me? Now, notice what they say in verse 33. They say, for a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy. And because thou hast, being a man, made thyself God. And so they knew exactly what Jesus was saying, and yet they weren't willing to listen. Jesus said, I've already told you, and the works that I have done prove the fact that I am the Messiah, the Son of God, and yet you have not believed what I said nor what I've done. And now when he, of course, tells them again that he is the Son of God, and because they're not willing to listen to him and follow him, that they are not a part of his sheepfold. And then he says in verse 30, I and my Father are one. Then they want to stone him to death because they consider him as having blasphemed. Okay? Now, Jesus, of course, answers them as you start there in verse 34. And so what we'll do tomorrow is we will begin there and see what Jesus has to say concerning their attitude toward him and their willingness, their desire to stone him to death. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back tomorrow, Lord willing, and thanks for joining.